The following quotation from the 11th century poet Ibn Rashid illustrates the importance attached to language at the time. He writes, "Whenever a poet emerged in an Arabic tribe, other tribes would come to congratulate. Feast would be prepared. The women would join together on lutes as they do at weddings, and old and young men would all rejoice at the good news. The Arabs used to congratulate each other only on the birth of a child and when a poet rose among them." The 9th century scholar Ibn Qutayba defined poetry as the Arab saw it, the mine of knowledge of the Arabs, the book of their wisdom, the truthful witness on the day of dispute, the final proof at the time of argument. A notable scholar of the 14th century remarked on the importance of poetry in Arab life. It should be known that Arabs thought highly of poetry as a form of speech. Therefore, they made it the archives of their history, the evidence for what they considered right and wrong, and the principal basis of reference for most of their sciences and wisdom. Navid Kermani, a writer and expert in Islamic studies, explains the extent to which the Arabs had to study to master the Arabic language. He suggests that a 7th century Arab lived in a world that almost worshipped poetry. Old Arabic poetry is a highly complex phenomenon. The vocabulary, grammatical idiosyncrasies, and strict norms were passed down from generation to generation, and only the most gifted students fully mastered the language. A person had to study for years, sometimes even decades, under a master poet before laying claim to the title of poet. Muhammad grew up in a world which almost religiously revered poetic expression. In light of the above quotation, the 7th century Arabs were best placed to challenge the Quran. They had reached the peak of eloquence and the pinnacle of linguistic mastery. As we will see, they collectively failed to produce an Arabic text that matched the Quran's linguistic and literary features. What scholars have to say about the unrivaled Quran? There have been a multitude of scholars from Western, Eastern, religious and non-religious backgrounds who have testified to the Quran's uniqueness. Below is a list of some of the scholars that say that the Quran cannot be imitated. Professor of Oriental Studies Martin Zammit claims that notwithstanding the literary excellence of some of the long pre-Islamic poems, the Quran is definitely on a level of its own as the most eminent written manifestation of the Arabic language. The linguistics expert Professor Hussein Abdul Rauf asserts that the Arabs at the time had reached their linguistic peak in terms of linguistic competence and sciences, rhetoric, oratory, and poetry. No one, however, has ever been able to provide a single chapter similar to that of the Quran. During an interview with Angelica Newrith, the distinguished professor of Quranic studies, she argued that the Quran has never been successfully challenged by anyone, past or present. No one has succeeded. This is right. I really think that the Quran has even brought Western researchers embarrassment, who weren't able to clarify how suddenly in an environment where there where there were not any appreciable written text, appeared the Quran with its richness of ideas and its magnificent wordings. In his translation of the Quran, N.J. Dawood, a Jewish scholar, describes it as a literary masterpiece. The Quran is the earliest and by far the finest work of classical Arabic prose. It is acknowledged